Abortion remains a controversial subject. From clinic bombings to pro-choice demonstration, this is a hot-button topic for many. However, for a variety of reasons, sometimes a pregnant woman chooses to have an abortion. My guest is the leader of the ministry, Rise Up. Laura Manley is presenting an important class that addresses this issue. I'm Nancy Noyes, and you're watching Vista and Beyond. Thank you for being here today, Laura.
Thank you for having me, Nancy.
Well, we're just delighted that you're here to talk about this subject. So, Laura, tell us exactly what is Rise Up?
Rise Up is a Bible study that deals with the issues that come after an abortion. There are many things that pop up in a woman's and a man's life after an abortion. It includes they experience remorse and regret and shame and condemnation and guilt they don't know what to do with. They don't even realize it's guilt sometimes. They express it with anger and all sorts of other behaviors that come out, including behaviors toward other children in their lives or their husbands or their family members, whoever. But these effects begin to affect them over time. Sometimes it's immediate, but mostly they feel some relief after the abortion because it's solved an immediate problem. But then later on, they start thinking about that child, and they don't know what to do with the feelings that come up. All those things that they've never experienced before all of a sudden are part of their lives. And so this Bible study addresses for men and women what can be done by God. And we use a study called Forgiven and Set Free for the women, and a study called Healing a Father's Heart for the men. And what this does is it places God into the midst of what's happening in their lives, so He can bring healing to them, so we can take them through the stages of grief and allow Him to bring His peace to their hearts, so they can learn to live with the decision that they made to have an abortion.
Why would a woman choose to have an abortion?
Those reasons are as varied as the women that have the abortions. I'll go through a list of things that happen. There may be severe emotional distress, financial distress, and the family can't afford another baby. They may feel their family is complete already. A baby may interfere with their education, work, or the ability to care for their family. A single woman may want to avoid being a single mom. She just doesn't think she can deal with that situation. And poverty is a huge factor in unplanned pregnancies due to the lack of availability and affordability of contraceptives. And so the bottom line is that they feel they cannot cope with having a baby in whatever circumstance they're in, and so they choose to end the life of the baby. And unfortunately, that happens instead of seeking some kind of assistance to perhaps even assistance to get through the pregnancy and assistance afterwards, or to give the child up for an adoption. There are so many couples that would love to have a child waiting years for an adoption. I've heard of women who say they couldn't give up a baby for adoption, and yet they choose to end the baby's life. And to me, that's just a puzzle of faulty logic. So what happens is the women suffer, the men suffer for various reasons.
Is abortion legal in the state of Arkansas?
This is a very complex issue in Arkansas right now. I'm going to quote some facts here. A law was passed and signed by the governor in March of 2019 that bans abortions after 18 weeks of gestation, with exceptions for medical emergency, rape, and incest. Then on March 9th of 2021, a more restrictive law was passed and signed that banned all abortions, with the exception of to protect the life of the pregnant mother. Then on July 20th, right after that, a U.S. District Court judge temporarily blocked that law from going into effect. That block is still in effect, leaving the more restrictive law in limbo right now. If Roe v. Wade is overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court, the law will go into effect. And addressing the issue of whether or not there's a reason for a woman to have an abortion to protect her life, I'd like to quote something from an interview that Nora O'Donnell of CBS This Morning did on August 13th of 2015, and she asked Dr. Ben Carson. I'm sure most people know he's a noted neurosurgeon. He was a candidate for president in 2016 and then HUD secretary for 4 years. She asked him to state whether he is opposed to all abortions, even in the case of life of the mother. His response was, "I think when it comes to the case of the life of the mother, you have to look at the individual situation. Recognize that it's largely a spurious agreement," he asserted, "because we have advanced so much in medicine these days, that situation rarely occurs." Some people have asked what happens if a woman is diagnosed with cancer and she's pregnant and she chooses to abort the baby so she can have chemotherapy. And that's certainly an alternative. However, I have read of many women who have been pregnant and been diagnosed with cancer and have chosen to postpone the chemotherapy so they can give their child life. So that's certainly a brave choice, and so that's one answer to the question of whether or not an abortion is necessary to save the life of a mother.
What about in the case where it's determined that the child will be born severely handicapped?
Well, I don't believe that that's a reason for an abortion. For whatever reason, that baby is handicapped, and I know that there are some states that allow abortion in the case of Down syndrome, if that's diagnosed, and others for severe disabilities. I know of women and men who have decided excuse me, have decided to have that child no matter what the handicap, because they feel that that is a God-given child no matter what. Dale Evans and Roy Rogers had a handicapped child, and not many people knew that back then. And they wrote a book afterwards called Angel Unawares. And the child did die later on in life, but they wrote about what a blessing that child was in their lives, that she truly was an angel in their lives. And they didn't even realize at the time how much joy that she brought to their lives. And in the case of, say, Down syndrome children, they're some of the most joyous people I've ever met in my life. They're just full of happiness and life, and they just glow with life. And I have a hard time understanding. Sure, it's hard. Sure, it's hard if you commit yourself to raising a handicapped child. Many people do it, and they say, hard as it is, it's a blessing.
Why do so many women, and men too, feel such a sense of guilt and remorse after having an abortion?
A woman bonds with her unborn baby almost immediately, even if she's not aware that that's happening. That bonding has begun. It's part of her DNA to be a mother. It's a mother mantle, God-given, if you will. All the talk of women's rights and pro-abortion cannot set aside this God-given mantle. So I have found, and I've heard story after story about why a woman has an abortion. that her decision, I have concluded that her decisions many times are panic decisions because they're just scared. They're scared to tell their parents, they're too young to get married, scared of having the baby, just scared for whatever reason. So they react in the only way they think they can, and society says abortion is okay, so they go ahead and get the abortion. And sometimes they're coerced by their boyfriends or their parents to have the abortion, even though they don't want it. So there's a whole different scenario of guilt. Why couldn't I fight this? So they are filled with shame and self-condemnation, and sometimes, many times, most times I would say, have a hard time forgiving themselves for having the abortion. So the really sad part is that the men who are involved in this abortion feel the same thing. They may have coerced the woman to have the abortion as a boyfriend or a husband. They may have fought the abortion as the boyfriend or the husband, and the woman decides to have the abortion again. Well, his father mantle is broken then because he's now a failure as a protector and a provider, his God-given role in this world. And so he feels guilt. He's a failure in his God-given role. And if the abortion happened in spite of his objections, he feels emasculated. Mm-hmm. So there's all sorts of things that enter into this whole scenario that cause the guilt and the shame and the suffering afterward.
Laura, will you share your story?
Yes. I was 36 years old, recently divorced, and had been married to an alcoholic for many years, and decided after abuse, verbal abuse, that I wasn't waiting for the physical abuse, and decided to protect myself and my son, and divorced my first husband. It was a tough time in life. I was single, raising a 15-year-old son, working full-time, going to school at night, and I was a busy lady. But I got involved with another man. Here I was, a so-called Christian, and I became sexually active with this man. And lo and behold, became pregnant. Well, here I am, one of those panic-stricken women. What do I do now? I don't have time for this in my life. I can't deal with this in my life. And even though the father of the baby said he would marry me, I didn't feel that there was a love there that a marriage could survive. And so I decided to abort the baby. Worst and most selfish decision of my life. Sometime later I met the man who's my husband now. Oh, was he a gift from God?
Is that me?
He loved me through everything. I was full of joy in the first few years of the marriage. It was a good marriage. It was a happy marriage. And I was full of joy. But all of the stuff from the abortion started building up inside me. I knew when I had the abortion that it was wrong. I knew I shouldn't do it. I just didn't see a way out of it. So
I know that.
I
Just
the anger built. It was mostly anger. And I would blow up at anything. And I just felt such shame and guilt and self-condemnation. It became a part of my soul. My soul was wounded. Our souls are our mind and our will and our emotions. Those were all wounded from the abortion. So it was part of who I was, and I just went on and on and on with this behavior that was self-destructive and destructive to our marriage. But the wonderful thing about it is my husband just loved me through it. he's a saint. That's all I have to say. He just loved me through it. And finally, a dear friend of mine that I shared, one of the few people I had shared that I had an abortion. I was so ashamed of it, I wouldn't share it with anybody. I had shared it with my husband before we were married, because I thought sure he'd say, I'm not going to marry you. But he said, I'm sorry you had to go through with that, and I love you. And so he just stuck with me, and I shared it with this friend, and she said, I have a Bible study for you, Forgiven and Set Free. And she said, I would just recommend that you go through that. So I said, well, okay, I'll do that. But you know what? It was so seared into my soul, all the damage to my soul was part of who I am. And I just was like a robot as I went through this Bible study. And I kept saying, I'm okay. I don't need this. I know I'm forgiven. I'm okay. And so I just kept going through it. But you know what? God had his way with me. And I finally broke and was able to grieve that baby. And that's what I needed. I needed to grieve that baby. And so shortly after that, we moved from Colorado to northern Indiana, and I went into the local pregnancy support center to volunteer there. And when I filled out the application as a volunteer, she said, I put on there that I was post-abortive and that I had been through this Bible study, and turned it in. And the director of the agency called and said, I see you've been through Forgiven and Set Free. She said, we're talking about starting that study here. Would you help us do that? And so I got involved with that. And we set up the whole program there. And I facilitated several groups through it. And then later became involved with another organization, weekend retreats, but that's a different story. And then we moved here. And so I went to volunteer at the local pregnancy center, and they, hoping that we could do something like this, and they said, we have a different way of doing it. So another lady and I from our church went to our pastor and said, we'd like to start this post-abortion study here. And he said, absolutely. And they have supported us every step of the way and made life as easy as they can for us. And we're trying to grow the ministry, training up people who've been through it to be leaders, so hopefully it will expand. So God has taken the negative of my life and turned it into a positive. And that's a real witness for him, and I thank him for it, because every time I take another group through that Bible study, this Bible study, he heals more. He heals more. And so it's a continuous thing, and I'm just so grateful.
Oh, that's wonderful. I really like what you said about taking a negative and turning it into a positive. I think that is so important, and you can definitely see the Lord working in his wondrous ways with you.
Thank you. Thank you. God, if we will allow him, he will take any of us that have been through anything negative and turn it into a positive and help other people. It might be a woman just walking up and saying something, I have this problem, and you just listen and you're just able to share out of who you are and the experiences you've been through. And God does these divine appointments all over the place, and you just never know when it's going to happen.
Well, what about children who might be involved in a mother's choice to abort a child?
Oh, boy.
Do they have any ramifications that go with that?
Yes. The post-abortion woman may not, after she has had her abortion, and becomes pregnant again, sometimes she'll get pregnant again to have a replacement child. That doesn't work. There is no replacement child. This child's an individual by him or herself, separate from the one who was lost to the abortion. So that doesn't work. It doesn't work in the mother's heart, and it doesn't work for the child. she may fear the loss of that baby, and so she becomes overprotective as the child gets older, and she becomes obsessive compulsive about being part of that child's life, and just generally smothers the child. Or she becomes a helicopter mom, you know, those ones that just come flying in and rescue children who are in some adverse situation rather than helping them learn from it and grow from it. Not rescuing is usually, rescuing is not usually a good thing unless they're in danger. But, and she may strive to be the world's best mom, and she just gives the child everything. And sometimes if she's aborted a child that's younger than a sibling, like I had a 15-year-old son, most women abort their first child. But in my case, my son was 15, and I aborted his little brother. I believe it was a little boy. So I found that I was withdrawing from him. There was something wrong with my mother mantle. It was broken, and I didn't realize what it was. And once I received healing in that area, things got better between us. But telling him and sharing with him about this child that would have been his little brother, he was very loving and when I told him, but he still talks about his baby brother, the one that he never had. And I named him Jonathan, and he calls him Jonathan, my little brother. And so I deprived him of his sibling, the one that he always wanted. Yeah. So I had to deal with those feelings, and he had to deal with those feelings. Yeah.
Wow, that's quite a testimony. Well, why would Rise Up be an important class for women and men?
Well, we believe at New Life Christian Church that the only healing, true healing for post-abortive men and women comes from God. He's the healer of all things having to do with the body and the soul. Again, the soul's the mind, the will, and the emotions that God gave to us. And so when they're damaged, as they are by an act of abortion, He's the only real healer. He's the only one that can touch the soul and say, I'm here. I am God. I forgive you. So these Bible studies provide a way for God to be introduced into the equation and for Him to speak into the situation so that their lives, He can impart His forgiveness into the hearts of the men and women who've suffered through an abortion.
Does that happen every time?
It happens in different ways. Yes, I have yet to see a woman who's been through this study not be healed. It may be in stages, and sometimes it's a big beginning, and then God takes it from there. Sometimes they become involved with the ministry, and as they does with me, they continue to be healed. We do aftercare. We meet with the ladies afterwards. We don't just take them through it and then say, you're done. We meet with them afterwards. We have gatherings, and it's a good thing. And I just can't recommend it enough because, as I said, I have yet to see a woman who has not gotten a huge leap of healing. The biggest part of that healing is forgiveness. For a Christian woman, forgiveness is the issue. They know they've sinned, they've had this abortion, and they cannot forgive themselves. And what that amounts to is accepting the fullness of what Jesus Christ has already done for us so we can receive, so we can be forgiven. They've asked for forgiveness. They know they're forgiven, but it's not made it from the brain to the heart.
I see.
They just can't wrap their emotions around that forgiveness. I'm guilty. It's a sin beyond forgiveness. It's not. Mm-hmm. And so once they accept the fullness of that forgiveness, then they're able to forgive themselves for what they've done to their baby.
Well, it sounds like a wonderful class, Laura. When does it begin, and how long does it go?
It begins on February 29th. It goes from 7 to 9 p.m. It's Mondays. It's 13 weeks. We begin promptly at 7 and we get out promptly at 9. We want people to be able to count on that. And so it is 13 weeks, and the classes are held in a confidential small group setting.
And where is the class being held?
The class is held at Bella Vista Christian Church, 103 Reardon, here in Bella Vista. And I want to emphasize that this is not limited to just our church. This was started as a community outreach to all the cities and towns surrounding Bella Vista. So anybody's welcome.
Oh, that's good to know, I think. Well, what are some of the topics that you and the participants will discuss in the class?
I do want to add one thing about the study. It's free
Oh,
to all
okay.
participants. There's absolutely no charge. We start out on the topics. We start on how do I know where I need healing? For every woman, it's different. So she may be full of anger like I was. She may have she's lost her joy, which was what I had done. I'd lost my joy. She may be just sad all the time, and she doesn't know why she's sad all the time. Sorrow is part of her life. Nothing's ever right. Those are all symptoms of post-abortion stress. And so we open up the topic of abortion. She shares her story, she or he, to begin with. Her story, we do it first, set the example, and then they share their story, and then we as leaders begin to see where this person needs healing. And the Holy Spirit comes into this big time. This is a Holy Spirit thing. So that's where we start. And then the next stage is the character of God. And we actually spend 2 weeks studying the character of God. And this is important because it doesn't work without Him. Mm-hmm. So the women must understand who God is, His character, His attributes, and what their relationship is to Him. And then we go into relief, because that's what they feel right after the abortion, and denial. And that's where they go after the abortion. I'm not talking about that anymore. That's done. It's over here. That's the denial. This is a grief process we're taking them through. They've not been allowed to do that because society has given them no way to grieve. Why would you grieve an aborted baby?
That's a good point.
Yeah. So we say, okay, we're gonna grieve this baby. So we do the relief and denial, and then we do anger. That's a big one. And we make them look at the abortion itself, their responsibility in having the abortion, and the other people who were part of that decision. And then we have them look at all of the anger that they feel to those people, because that anger has to become forgiveness so they can release that out of their lives. So that's a big deal. And then we get the need to forgive. We go, okay, this person did this in your abortion, or you did this. Let's deal with that. Forgiveness. Because forgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Well, forgiveness kills you.
Yes.
It doesn't kill the other person. So we get into the need to forgive. And then we deal with depression. There's a lot of depression. A lot of that comes to men and women, especially women, who become drug addicted or alcoholics. And it's all, you'll find that many, if not most women who have lost their families and their children to drugs or alcohol have an abortion in their background. Mm. And that's an unfortunate fact. They're bearing their feelings because they don't know what to do with them. So we deal with the depression, and then we get to forgiven and set free. And this is where they're set free, and where that head knowledge goes to the heart, and they feel forgiven. And I cannot tell you the joy just watching some of these women. The ashes become beauty, and mourning turns into dancing, and sometimes I sit there and I'm in awe of what God's doing. And it's all God. We're just there to be part of it, to bring it to fruition. And then we have acceptance, which is the final stage of grief. So they've acknowledged their babies. Many times they name them, and we do a memorial service to remember those babies. So they've grieved, and now they can accept and go on with their lives and talk about their abortion, talk about their baby, and share with other people.
Would this be a good class for mothers who are considering having an abortion?
This is a post-abortion study.
Okay.
Women who are considering an abortion, I would recommend that they contact Loving Choices Pregnancy Center at Rogers. They have ways to help women who choose, they have ways to help women decide, hopefully, to not have an abortion and choose to have their baby, either give it up for adoption, but most raise their own children. So they have the resources to help them get through the pregnancy, and they have parenting classes and all sorts of resources to help them afterwards to get through those first years of raising that child. It's quite an extensive commitment from Loving Choices. So I would say if anybody is considering an abortion, contact New Life Christian Church and tell them you want to talk to me. And so I would be glad to sit and talk with them. I would take them to Loving Choices if they would like that, just to get them there. So this is for post-abortion, but we're trying to avoid the abortion too.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Laura, thank you so much for being with us today. It has been a real pleasure and a joy. And thank you for your work on this important topic. We appreciate it. So, thank you again, and I'm Nancy Noyes for Vista and Beyond.